Welcome to Season 4 of the Knack for Business podcast.
We have a question for you in the audience. Do you ever feel overlooked in your career because you're not the loudest voice in the room? That's exactly what Greg will tackle in this episode. He'll share how introverts can step into leadership, communicate with confidence, and grow their careers without faking extroversion. If you've been waiting for permission to lead authentically, this conversation will show you the tools to do it and why your voice matters now more than ever. Our guest is Greg Weinger from SheerID. Greg is the host of the Powerful Introvert Podcast, where he helps quiet leaders unlock confidence, strengthen communication, and grow their careers without pretending to be extroverts. Drawing on years of coaching, research, and conversations with leaders, he equips introverts with practical tools to thrive in leadership, close the income gap, and make their voices heard. As an introvert himself, Greg proves to you don't have to be the loudest in the room to make a lasting impact. Greg, it's absolutely a pleasure to have you here. Do you have a favorite quote or saying you'd like to start us off with, sir?
Sure. Stephen Hawking likes to say that quiet people have the loudest minds.
This is true, but especially when you're making a nuke, that's pretty loud. That's quite the sunshine. What made you realize being an introvert could be a strength and not a setback? Like, what was the trigger event for you? How did that come about?
Well, I have a particularly hard head. And so I spent the majority of my career um, in denial, ignoring all signs, basically pretending that I was an extrovert because I had this idea in my head that in order to be a leader, you had to be an extrovert. And so I wanted to be a leader. So I did everything in my power. I would take the tests, they give you like the DISC and the Myers-Briggs. And the first time around I got this result, it said, like, what's I, like this introvert? And I started looking into it and I was like, well, this seems bad. And so the next time that I had to take a test, I looked at the answers and I was like, okay, well, this is the answer an extrovert would give. So I faked all the results so nobody would know. I developed ways. I had feedback early on. Like, well, you're the leader. You have to speak out and stand up and beat your chest and promote yourself. All these things, and so I kind of forced myself to do these things, uh, and this worked. Eventually, worked in my own way. I came up with other ways of doing things, but it wasn't until I was a senior leader reporting to a CEO on an executive team, and I started struggling because everything in my career I was a good student, I was a old nerd. Like, if I could study for the test, this was a test I couldn't study for. I couldn't study my way out of it. But I had some help, an amazing executive coach, and he really helped me understand myself and gave me tools to deal with some of the most chaotic situations that I could encounter. So I get on the other side of all this, and have all the tools to work at this level. And then only then I came across this book. It was by Susan Cain, Cain. It's called Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. This book came out in 2012 and it changed my life. So I can tell you all the reasons why, and I'm not alone in this. So this book has sold millions of copies. She has a TED Talk. It's amazing. Millions of people have watched it. And I hear this consistently. So I have a podcast, the Powerful Introvert Podcast, you heard. And I talk to introverted leaders and speakers and people like this. And it's fairly common that reading that book transformed those people's lives because it gave them an understanding, almost like an operating manual. You're different. That's okay. And introverted people are super successful. Many, many, many are, but they're doing it differently. So that's the turning point.
Wow. For me, it was I had to give a presentation on nonviolent crisis intervention to nursing staff and orderlies. You make or break pretty quick due to the crowd response. It's improv large.
I love it when people find beneath their skin where it works for them and they don't take someone else's labels as gospel and they grow with it. So congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
I've also been told they've done some studies and there's some people that fall happily in the middle that are introverted when appropriate and extroverted when appropriate, and then Seamus both. Have you heard any of that?
Absolutely. So, I mean, there is a term, there's introverts, extroverts. Sometimes the people who fall in the middle are referred to as ambivert. It's a continuum. So everybody's going to have, and no extrovert. I talked to plenty of extroverts who say, sometimes I just need a day alone. Like I just need to spend time in my head and like, and does this mean I'm an introvert? And I was like, no, we all share some of these qualities to ourselves, and it's just in different degrees. And so it's really awareness about what are you feeling, what are you needing in the moment that's important. And so I kind of go to some of the definitions of introversion, and we're talking about general tendencies, like no one is wired all one way. Well, yeah, so you're pure. You said earlier you're an extrovert, right? Introverts fear you. They shouldn't. Introverts are people we just tend to think first. Where does your energy flow? It's going inward. I'm feeling my feelings and I go into my thoughts. I'm thinking first and figuring it out. And then I'm gonna say what I think. I'm coming out with what I say. But extroverts, they speak in order to think. They're thinking aloud more typically. You're emoting, you're reacting to people in the world, and it's just that's how you experience yourself. So is it inward or outward? It's kind of simple when you put it that way. But one of the keys that I learned, and this is in that book, is that these tendencies are hardwired. And so it was very pointless for me to try to change them. You know, like these are things that are just you gotta accept, look at how you are and accept that. But what's another super important point in the book is that this is different from shyness. So shyness is fear. Everybody experiences fear. Everybody experiences, you know, some people don't experience social anxiety, which is, kind of a fear. But we all experience fear of one kind or another. And fear is something that no matter who you are, it can be overcome. There are all kinds of techniques, progressive exposure. You try something, you gradually get used to it. There's all kinds of great ways to overcome fear. So you can overcome your fear of public speaking if you're an introvert or an extrovert. You can overcome shyness in parties, things like that, networking events, all these things that we think of, okay, those are introverted activities, these are extroverted activities. It's not the case. It's some people are going to have shyness and that can be overcome. It has nothing to do whether if you're an introvert or not.
So, what's the definition of an introvert? And what's the definition of an extrovert? If you're knowing that there's a gradient level, right? So there's
Mhm.
different shades of it. But what's the absolute introvert and what's the absolute extrovert defined as?
Yeah, I mean, so it's continuum. I mean, I go back to so the first person who started talking about this, who kind of invented the concept was Carl Jung, and he spoke of it as the direction of energy. So is that energy directed inward or outward? And so that's kind of where I get to. Are you going inward first thinking? Are you going outward first acting? Kind of world. There's another kind of common definition that people talk about. It's, on the internet, they talk about where do you get your energy from? And, so it's kind of describing, I think of that less of as a definition. It's kind of, it's describing a general tendency. I do find it energizing to be alone. Alone, I have my most creative ideas, and I have a meditation practice. I like to spend that time, but I also love to be in groups and have one-on-one conversations and group conversations and group brainstorms. So that's not a hard and fast rule. It depends on the group. Certain groups, yeah, me and introverts are going to thrive in. Basically, if you're comfortable, you drop us in a networking room full of people we don't know. That's not as comfortable. So that's going to be net draining. The other reason why introverts get kind of and then contrast that with extroverts. Extrovert goes to the party and, then get more and more excited, more and more energized, and then goes 2 hours, 4 hours, they go to the after party and the bar afterward. Like, that's obviously a very energizing situation for many extroverts. So what's going on? What's going on with the introvert brain, and now that starts to get into the chemistry of the brain. Introvert brains tend to be like a lot of the activities in the forebrain, the frontal lobes, thinking, processing, that's energy intensive stuff. And so what happens is these activities that are good for solving problems or, coming up with stories or thinking about the world, we're spending all that on a party, processing all the music and all the conversations around them and the lights and all this stuff. And so introvert brains are burning really, really hot, trying to think of conversations and thinking deeply about every little thing people are saying. And people are just kind of running it on. So that's why we burn out quickly. I have like an hour and a half at a party. I'm pretty tired at that point. It just depends. Um, I think that experience is really common. And the extrovert brains, there's a lot more activity in things having to do with interacting with other people, understanding other people's emotions, the reward centers of the brain. And so these get activated in these social situations. So it's generally speaking, at a base level, introvert brains are kind of at a high level of activity, high level of arousal, just steady state. That's why we can sit in a quiet room and be like, yeah, this is pretty cool. But then, and extroverts, their base level is a little bit lower. And so to feel good, feel comfortable, they're going to seek more stimulation. They're going to want to talk to people. They're going to consume more media. And the quiet room is a little more oppressive for them.
Is that like attention deficit? With that kind of border on that spectrum, if you're an extreme extrovert, is it kind of fit in that mold, or is it just another layer of complexity?
It's a good question. I do see overlap sometimes there, but I haven't read anything specifically about that.
Bernie allows me one off the wall question, podcast, and this is the one. A lot of people, they talk about their journey of business and whatever. I'm actually interested in when you were 7 or 8. You made a decision that what you were told wasn't necessarily your life. Deal with it. And, have you ever thought about becoming an accountant? What made you just say, no, I can do this. I have desires. I want to be like, go back before corporate, before you knew this in your cells. I want to hear about that story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think of a point in time. Something in me always knew that the way the world operated, I felt like there was another way. I mean, I think it goes back to seeing movies and media and Wall Street and like you have to be mean, you got to be a bastard to win and, to dominate and all this stuff. And I think there's just always been something intuitive in me that says, no, you can be strong, you can guide people, you can be a force in the world, and you don't have to be mean. And so I'm kind of all about trying to prove that. And I look for people in the world who are doing that too. There's examples around me. And people I know, people meet in industry. Actually, maybe this idea comes from my grandfather, who is, um, I my mom talked about him. He was this, and they to be, you can still be a good businessman, be a nice guy, and so like you're rooting on all the nice men and women, and all the people out there who are being kind. And I do think it's possible to do all the things, be successful with kindness.
You heard
So,
it, Bernie. He called me mean.
he just called you average, is what you're saying, Wayne?
Oh, I actually have a really neat question for our listeners that podcasting is a relatively new industry. I would say most people would say it's roughly 10 years old. How did you go from I'm doing this and I've written about this and I want to talk about this to others want to hear about this? Tell me that I grabbed the mic and posted it story.
Well, it really started. I mean, it probably started in a meditation session where got this idea for the name. And actually, the name for my podcast, the Powerful Introvert Podcast, comes from a colleague of mine, where I heard her describe there was somebody we were working together, and he was reporting to her. He was a quieter individual, and And she said, well, I told him you should look and, try to emulate a powerful introvert like Greg. And I was like, ooh, I like that. But then that came back to me in that moment. And I had been thinking about purpose. What do I want to give back? What is something that I can do that is meaningful? And it's not that my family and my workplace are not meaningful, but if I wanted to make a bigger contribution, what would it be? And I thought about my younger self. What would I have wanted to hear? What kind of encouragement could have been there for me? And so there was something in me that wanted to reach out to younger aspiring leaders who are maybe considering that on the quieter side. And then, what should they hear? Because there's a lot more information now than there was. Starting in 2012, there's just scores of podcasts, books, and I do credit Susan Cain for kind of spawning this, the quiet revolution. I call it that, and you can even look on Google Trends. And I wrote an article about this because I saw this. There's sort of a lower level of interest in search and introversion and extroversion. You know, starting the 2000s when they started tracking this. Now it really ramped up starting in 2012, and that's when these books and there are multiple websites, blogs, kinds of things coming on, some podcasts, starting out even back then. These are people some of them I've interviewed on my podcast. But it wasn't until 2020, around maybe April or May of 2020, where interest in the terms introversion and extroversion absolutely exploded. So, you know what I'm talking about? The pandemic forced a bunch of people to consider, am I an introvert or am I an extrovert? And more importantly, I'm absolutely miserable. What the hell is going on? I'm an extrovert. Versus in my case, I was like, this is amazing. I get to work at home. I get to go out and walk my dog, and I can step immediately out of a meeting into, just to relax or something like this. A lot of people found out during that time period about if they're an introvert or an extrovert.
So in this particular space, if you're, I guess, kind of, if you're the philosopher king or a stoic, would you define them as introverts? And if that's the case, if someone is not sure how to express himself, because the introversion is like, do I say something? How do I say something? How do you get them past that part? So if they're the philosopher king, how do you get them to open up and say, hi, give us your share us your wisdom?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of people are more in the camp where they have these thoughts. They're aware that they have wisdom or things that they want to contribute, but they're not sure how to go about it. There's some fears, and so I'm putting myself in my own place and people that I mentor, and there can be a lot of fears and hesitancy to speak up. And these might be meetings, it might be in a group, but usually my advice is to start small. So start in the most comfortable setting. Sometimes someone might be fearful of speaking up in a small group. So find opportunities to speak one on one with something. A lot of introverts have a lot of skill in writing. So use your writing skill to share your thoughts and ideas, share emails, write things down in documents, share things out. If you're not comfortable speaking up in the meeting, circulate something around before you get into the meeting, and then maybe someone else will bring it up. Get an ally, somebody who will bring up your topic or say, "Oh, hey, Wayne, you had this great idea the other day. I, do you want to share a little bit about it?" So that's where someone can get, just the basic level of comfort. And then as people progress, these things are fears again. So with exposure, you gain comfort, you start to build some confidence. And so then you get a more challenging situation. Leading a meeting may sound daunting, but it's actually a fantastic opportunity for an introvert because you're assigned the role. everyone expects you to kick off the meeting and start to guide the conversation and move things along. And so you got a job, you got to do it. And so there's no question about it. You're not going to hold back because, you know, or because you got to do it. So that's another way to develop the skills. And so then it's just looking for opportunities more and more, a little bit bigger audience, maybe a more senior audience, maybe with people you don't know next time. And you just build up and up and up. And very soon you have comfort in all of these situations that seemed almost impossible in the past.
One thing that I've been told that I really like is that introverts are not always worse at networking, they just do it differently. And I've talked to extroverts that like working with introverts because they take better notes. Tell me about planning for it to be heard and how you wire it differently than somebody who's just in a circus.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you captured it in the word planning. Um, as one bit of advice for extroverts, any situation that you're not sure how it's going to go can benefit from planning. Come up with 3 or 5 bullet points of topics you want to cover. In a meeting. If you're going into a networking event, figuring out who it is that in advance that you want to talk to. What questions do you want to ask them? What might be some things that you could start out with so you're not just sitting on the sideline, just thinking in the moment. Because what happens to introvert brains is because you're thinking first, you're not naturally flowing into the situation. So it's very helpful to do some of that thinking in advance. And so, to this day, I'm sure I do a lot more preparation than a lot of my peers coming into a meeting, figuring out the topics. And then if you've thought them through, then it does come out more naturally and you're prepared to speak to the points, things like that. So yeah, preparation number one.
How do you, with extroverts, blurting things out is really easy. Like, boom, there it is. And for an introvert, how do you handle getting a word in edgewise, or even not standing the ground as in your contesting wills? But if you're in a debate, how do you come back across? What are the techniques that you can come in so there's good etiquette and you're not hurting anybody's feelings?
Yeah, you're talking about a real challenge for introverts, and including myself. This is something I personally had to work on a lot. And, you know, preparation helps. But so let's say you're going into a situation and I need to explain something to you. I'm going to say, okay, listen, Bernie, I have something really important I want to talk to you about. I might need 2 or 3 minutes. Help me, then bear with me. It may take me a minute to get through it, but it's really important. I promise it's going to be good. So you're setting the stage and preparing people. So that's number one thing you can do. Now, I've worked with people who don't like it's not physically in them to give you 2 minutes without blurting in, jumping in, and then it's like, so you got to hold your ground a little bit. Wait, 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 Bernie, hey, let me speak. I promise you this is good. Wait, we'll come back to that. And then sometimes, like if it keeps happening, you have to kind of turn up the volume a little bit. You got to raise your voice, and it's like, hey, look, I told you, Bernie, like stop it. Please stop interrupting me. Like I'm going to get through this. We'll get back to your point. So you kind of have to match the energy. And what I found is like a lot of introverts are quiet. Like there's, go back to the book, quiet. We're naturally quiet. We're not, you know, the boisterous interaction is not the default. And there are a lot of people in the world where that's just how they live. They maybe come from big, loud families, and everybody's like bantering and going back and forth. And so, if that's the room that you're walking into, and you're an introvert, then you might have to match that energy. So you've got to say that, like, if I'm going to be heard in this situation, like this isn't ideal, this isn't the best for me, but it's really important for me to get my point across. So I'm going to have to summon more energy and match it in the situation. And this is where, this is acting extroverted. Well, it's the reality. I have to match that situation I know what I'm doing. I'm doing this consciously, and I know I can do it. I've got the resources to do it. So this is those are going to be some of the more uncomfortable situations you're gonna encounter as an introvert, but that's really the technique. So it's prepare the people, hold the floor. Sometimes you got, you've seen presidential debates. I'm speaking, like it gets that ridiculous. But, and then some other times, yeah. And then, I guess that last part is sometimes you got to take the gloves off.
So, you obviously watch media like the rest of us, but in your background and training, have you seen people who are naturally introverts that were famous that we wouldn't have known as introverts?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so you just go to Hollywood and you can kind of rattle off actors who would be surprising. Harrison Ford is a common example as like introverts. Some of the creators, Steven Spielberg, Bruce Streisand. There's just a variety of people who just really good at faking it.
So do you have advice for them, for folks that are, and I get the introversion, do I speak up? Two, this is taking a lot of energy for me. And, if I spin the energy up, I'm going to either have to have either a sugar blast or a carb blast, or I'm going to need like 30 minutes of downtime. Maybe even a nap if it was a really good session. Is there a way for them to manage that and then get going? How do you help them through that piece? So they just get her done.
Absolutely, and you're bringing out kind of the second core essential skill for introverts is energy management. And so that's another big challenge. So preparation, big thing, help you through the situations, but you got to manage your energy through the day. And so especially if there's an event that meeting or, some interaction is going to require a lot of energy, it's ideal if you can leave some time before that. And, you take a short walk, go pet the dog or something. Anyway, so you kind of give yourself a little chance to recharge before going into it. Or if you have the option, if there are three high energy things you need to do through the day, spread them out so you have time afterward to recharge, to your point. Or if you have the ability, don't do them all in the same day, spread them out over time. You're not going into the red zone. So this is a real challenge for people, a lot of people, especially people in business where we have meetings back to back to back to back. And there is not time in between them. And especially if it's a bad meeting, it's like a hard meeting, then I had somebody on there he's a meeting scientist. I had a meeting scientist on my podcast. He studies at the Joseph A. Allen. He studies at the University of Utah. And they found that it takes people on average 17 minutes to recover from a bad meeting and just 5 minutes to recover from a good meeting. Things went well. So a lot of us are running in a deficit, and that was not specific to introverts or extroverts, by the way. This is everybody. We're all kind of running into the red zone, and we work without giving ourselves breaks. So I do say, so I think this is important. It's especially important for introverts, but in some ways, introverts are like a canary in the coal mine. What's good for introverts is really good for everybody because, like, in managing your energy, that's true. In making sure that everyone speaks is true. So, another really important point with introverts, if you're a leader of any kind of leader, you want the best ideas out of your people. You want your ideas from everyone. So, you really want to hear from everyone, or you're really hurting yourself. So you want to structure your meetings consciously. So, okay, well, I'm not worried about the extroverts. They'll sit there and think on the fly and come up with their best ideas right there in the moment. They're bouncing off it there in a moment. But the introverts are not going to come up with their best ideas. So what do you want to do? You want to give them an assignment in advance, give them some time to think and work on their ideas and bring their ideas where they've thought of them when they're at their best and they bring them into the discussion. And then you sort of have a even playing field and you have the best ideas from everyone. Actually, you get better ideas from extroverts too if they do their work in advance. There's more meeting science. I'm filled with meeting science today.
Extroverts could actually plan? I don't believe I'll have to check. Greg, I do have a question for you. It's not for our whole audience, but it's for a chunk of them. Some introverts are incredibly talented, incredibly gifted, and incredibly hardworking, and they're told they're invisible. How do you go against that where you're not just hearing the loudest guy in the room to get that new job?
Well, it really starts with leadership. Leaders need to know what I just said, really, is that I want to be successful. I want to make my company, myself, everyone around me as successful as possible. How do we do that? I need the contributions from everybody in the room. And so they have to recognize that. And and this isn't easy, by the way. So like I've sat in this leadership role for a while now, and I found that I'm the loudest person in the room in a number of rooms. I work in product, I work in software, I work with engineering teams, and I will have a call where there's 30 people, I'm the only one talking. And I was like, well, what does everyone think? 'Cause there's radio silence. So I have to be careful. I have to watch it. So, I mean, and I have some awareness of this. So I'm empathetic with leaders like it's fun to talk, it's fun to share your ideas, but you have to give people space to talk. And sometimes if they don't talk in that moment, you've got to say you got to follow up with them, or you got to send email or Slacks, or sit on with people one on one. What you really think, you know?
Do generations treat this process differently? Are the baby boomers and the Gen X's different about this scale?
So I heard some interesting stats about this. So going back to the history, so let's talk about America, or just the 1800s and before, pre-industrial. People are living in they're on farms, they're in small towns, and the quiet, upstanding citizen. So this was the American ideal. So that's actually an introvert forward culture. And compared to Asian cultures are very introvert. There's not this idea that the extrovert is the leader, is the model citizen. So that really came about during the industrial where people start moving into the cities. There aren't these small, tight knit communities, and so for people to be successful and stand out, they start taking on the salesman persona, the Dale Carnegie, win friends and influence people. And so by the 1950s, like this is like enshrined in our psychological manuals, like, antisocial personality disorder. And people get really worried about the shy kid. Is he going to be okay? Is he going to be successful? And it's almost pathologized. It's kind of a exaggeration. But that's really with us. I was raised like this. We're raised in these gigantic public school classrooms, which are loud and chaotic and really not ideal for introverted kids. So we fast forward to my kids, Gen Z, and I heard some statistics where some of these kids they're going into the college years, and 70% are reporting they're introverted. And these are kids who are raised through lockdowns and completely in social media and reduced exposure to social situations. So I don't know what the truth is. I don't think that dozens of scientific studies and polls like that, but it is an interesting thought.
Are introverts seen as more authentic than extroverts, especially when they're networking?
Possibly, but it's hard to say though. If you're not seeing enough of the introvert, like how can you tell if they're authentic? I mean, that's one of the things I tell people. One of the bits of advice for introverts is you got to show people who you are. You got to let people in on what's going on the inside, particularly as a leader. You've got to share your thinking. How'd you get there? You got to bring people along and you got to share parts of your personality. And that is not natural. And so, in some ways, and the extrovert who's just all on the surface, they're not hiding anything, that can be very authentic. maybe the introvert is only comfortable feeling authentic in smaller groups or in one-on-one situations, and you're not getting as much of their authentic self in a situation where they're not comfortable.
Greg, whether it's you have a podcast, do you have a book yourself as well?
I do not. I am pretty new to the subject area. I started writing my newsletter fall of last year, started podcasting in January. So I've got 25 episodes published, 50 or so scheduled for the year. Taken some inspiration from you two, Bernie, you had kind of tipped me off to, the type of production schedule that you do and, some of your promotion network, things like that. So I'm relatively developing my idea, so I don't have a book yet. I have a ebook that I wrote about helping people get promoted, because I think that's a challenge for introverts. So there's some statistics that say on average introverts make $10,000 a year less than extroverts. Simply because their self promotion is not coming natural to them, and that in very senior leadership that there's only 2 to 4% of people are introverts. So there's some stats, even if I find it hard to believe it's as dismal as all that, but because there are a lot of introverts in senior leadership, that prominent examples like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, but it's clearly very underrepresented. And so that's why I want to be out there and trying to help people learn about this.
I'm wondering, you got a podcast. I think that's an obvious first step. But do you do consulting for teams? How do you monetize this process? How have you monetized your learning? How's it work?
I have not yet. So I can tell you people that I know, because I'm still working in industry. I'm a senior leader in a software company. And so this is really kind of a side gig. I have my podcast business hours that I keep, and early mornings and nights and weekends. But I have encountered a number of people who do coach introverts, and for fees and act as consultants. And so there's people doing really incredible work out there. And so maybe at some point I will join them.
Maybe you need to tie up with an extrovert so we can tell people how to get to you. If they were going to get to you, how would they do that, my friend?
Well, the Powerful Introvert Podcast is very easy to find on Apple and Spotify and YouTube. I have my website, the powerfulintrovertpodcast.com, and you just search for those things and you'll find it. Lots of good content already. I appreciate my extrovert friends helping to spread the word.
Excellent. So you got a podcast. You have an upcoming focus closing the income and leadership gap for introverts by equipping them with communication and confidence tools. This is good. And I want to say thank you to Greg, my co-host Wayne, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. So Greg helps if you're feeling a little bit docile and you realize, hey, I'm an introvert. Greg's there to help you because he can help you get past feeling overlooked in business and discover the confidence and communication skills to help you get further in your leadership and also keep you happy, keep you in a good state of mind.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVISIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter u.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motive8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.